Disclaimer. The J.K. Rowling is cast. Minerva, please escort Mr. Potter to Gryffindor Tower to collect his belongings, and then to his godfather's residence, if you don't mind, Dumbledore said. Yes, Headmaster, McGonagall said shakily. She looked over at Percy and said in her sternest voice, Do you see what you've done, Mr. Weasley? Harry thought he saw Percy flinch. We will be sorry to see you go, Harry. Stay safe, Dumbledore continued. Yes, sir, Harry replied. Oh, and Umbridge, I want my broom back when I leave. And for once, he didn't have to call her Professor. It felt good. But his good mood was fleeting. He knew he was doing the right thing. In fact, things would be better for him in many ways, but it meant leaving his friends behind. With her. And beyond that, the sheer indignity of being expelled by that woman for doing the right thing grated on him. Part of him wanted to stay, no longer to spite her, but for Ron, Ginny, Neville, Luna, and the twins. But it was too late for that. Mr. Potter, I'm disappointed that you chose to go along with that, Professor McGonagall said as she escorted him through the corridors. Do you have a better idea, Professor? He said bitterly. I'm sure the headmaster could have found a way. He shook his head. He lost control a long time ago. Umbridge is the supreme leader, isn't she? Any power he has, she can take away with another decree. McGonagall thought for a minute. You could have pressed the matter in court, she said. What court? The Wizengamot? The same one that tried to railroad me and kicked Dumbledore out of office? No thanks, Professor. It would have bought you time, Mr. Potter, maybe even delayed until the end of the school year. Honestly, I'm not that mad, he tried to convince himself. It doesn't hurt me personally that much, and I'll get away from her. I'm just sorry I have to leave my friends. Be that as it may, Mr. Potter, I promise you that I will personally see to it that your expulsion is expunged from your record once the Ministry comes to its senses. Thanks, Professor. I'm sure the headmaster will also tell you that it's imperative you stay at headquarters, unless the order approves you to travel. With you-know-who after you as he is, it would be far too dangerous for you to wander off. Yeah, I get it, he said. They came to the portrait of the fat lady. I suppose the die is cast, McGonagall sighed to herself. Correct, the fat lady said, and the portrait swung open. McGonagall rolled her eyes. The password was supposed to be in Latin. Everyone looked up when Harry stepped inside. Ron and Ginny rushed to his side at once, demanding answers. We thought you were done for, mate, Ron said. What happened in there? Ron, dorm room, now, Harry barked. Ron flinched, wide-eyed, and quickly followed him and McGonagall up the stairs, with Ginny hot on his heels. They arrived in his room, and Harry pulled out his trunk and started throwing clothes into it. Harry, what are you doing? Ron demanded. I'm leaving. What? I've been expelled. What? No! Ginny rushed forward to grab him, but he pushed her back as gently as he could. Seamus ratted us out, he explained. Umbridge told his mum on him. He's got the pimples and everything. Bloody hell! Ron exclaimed. They caught me, so there was no way she wouldn't expel me. We just got lucky they didn't get anyone else. Shacklebolt confounded him so he couldn't remember anyone else's names. Harry, you can't leave! Ginny hugged him close. You can't leave me! He paused and kissed her just briefly. I have to, Ginny, he said. I'm going to headquarters. I'll be able to study with Hermione with Professor Slughorn. Here, I want you to take this. He handed her his communication mirror, and she looked up at him in surprise. I'll be able to call you on it from Sirius's mirror. Be sure to share it with your brothers. At that, Ginny threw her arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. Oi! Ron said. McGonagall cut them off. Ginny backed away, brushing furiously. Sorry, Professor, she muttered. Ron, take the map, Harry continued, thrusting the Marauder's map into his hands. And take my coin too. It's the master. You'll be able to send messages with it. But whatever you do with it, don't get caught. I second that, Mr. Weasley, Miss Weasley, McGonagall said. We cannot afford any more expulsions. Plus our mum would kill us, Ron said. It's even more serious than that, Mr. Weasley, she said.
I'll be frank. Professor Umbridge is looking for a reason to fire the headmaster. With further expulsions, she may be able to charge mismanagement to do it." "Which I'd better warn the other heads to tell their students," she thought to herself. "We can't have Potter setting an example."
"Potter is expelled?" Voldemort asked. "Yes, my lord," Snape replied. It was information that would be public knowledge soon enough, so he only stood to gain by telling the Dark Lord a few hours early.
"And where is he going?"
"He'll be back under the Fidelis charm by now. He expressed an intent to join Granger in her private tutoring."
"I see. But how will he take his owls? They're normally held only at Hogwarts."
"He will be allowed to return to the school to take them."
"How interesting," Voldemort replied. "You do well to tell me this, Severus. Inform me of the examination schedule as soon as it is finalized."
"Of course, my lord." Hermione snuck Astoria back into the school early the next morning. Fortunately, the girl had recovered quickly. A few minutes of oxygen therapy had gone a long way, and she was well rested and ready to go. Only they didn't know what they would find when they got back to the castle. They'd had to leave Hermione's house before the Daily Prophet arrived. Had all of Dumbledore's army been given detention? Had they been expelled? Had Dumbledore himself been sacked? There was a new educational decree on the wall, but it wasn't what Hermione had expected. By order of the High Inquisitor of Hogwarts, to avoid interference in the educational process, students enrolled in educational programs outside of Hogwarts may not visit except for ministry-sanctioned educational events. The above is in accordance with Educational Decree No. 30, signed by Dolores Jane Umbridge, High Inquisitor. Hermione stared. Where had that come from? The only person it affected was Hermione herself, although if that woman knew about the DA, she would have plenty of motive to want to keep her out of the castle. But then, why would they need to put it up inside the school? Then she caught herself. It would make sense to do that if Umbridge expected her to come back to the castle and see it. And if she was expecting that, she was probably planning to catch her.
"Crap, I have to get out of here!" she exclaimed. "Astoria, you'll have to go on your own from here. If Snape gives you a hard time, tell him Dumbledore ordered me to keep you safe." "You're really not joking about that?" she said. "Trust me, it'll work. Bye, Astoria. I'll see you, hopefully." She raced home. It looked like she was completely isolated from Hogwarts now. It only got worse when she got back and her dad showed her the front cover of the Daily Prophet. It turned out that she wasn't the only person affected by the new decree. Harry Potter expelled! She got the full story out of Harry on Thursday at headquarters. Mrs. Weasley had pitched a fit, of course, and Sirius said he wasn't sure whether to be disappointed or proud that Harry had got in more trouble than the Marauders ever had for a worthy cause. In retrospect, she supposed she should be thankful it wasn't worse. Only Harry had been expelled, and they hadn't had enough evidence to punish anyone else, although Seamus had been withdrawn from school for his own safety, and so healers could try to break the curse Hermione had put on him. Not likely, she thought. Curses often had only one counter-curse, because the differential equations used to create them often had a unique solution. It was what separated them from simple hexes. A curse could be overpowered or disentangled in many other ways, as curse breakers knew well, but it was much harder than it was if you knew the counter, and in the flexible medium of parchment, Hermione had found a counter the healers might never figure out, though Seamus's Muggle father might. Muggle acne medicine. She praised Harry's foresight in giving his mirror to Ginny and the Marauder's map and his coin to Ron. She was a little worried they might try something unwise with them, but it was good that they were still able to communicate. Harry had started his lessons with Professor Slughorn, whom Hermione was not surprised to find was just as ingratiating with Harry as with her, although he was probably a little disappointed that Harry had not inherited his mother's talent for potions. "I was hoping I could do some of my lessons with you, Hermione," Harry said. "You could help me out, maybe, but your schedule's really weird." "It's not weird, Harry," she admonished. "I'm doing a compacted schedule because I can only come 2 days a week. You can probably join me for some of the classes, but I'm doing them all at different paces, so I don't know how well that would work out."
"Couldn't hurt to try, though," he said.
"No, I suppose not."
They tried it, with limited success. Of the 3 classes Hermione was studying that day, Harry could easily keep up with her in charms, but wasn't taking ancient runes, and he didn't have a hope in potions. It was too bad. He said he was quite a bit better without Snape breathing down his neck, but he would need a lot of remedial tutoring to get his work up to the O level he would need for the RR track. The following Monday, they would learn that Harry could just as easily keep up in defense, and he'd managed well enough with the magical creatures and herbology theory lectures, but Hermione's deeper theoretical understanding of transfiguration put her well ahead of him there. Meanwhile, on their first day of lessons together, Hermione asked Harry to mirror call Ginny when they finished up for the day. "Harry Potter," he called on the mirror, and she looked at him queerly until she remembered that the mirror he was holding was enchanted to respond to Sirius Black. This was getting confusing.
"Harry and Hermione,"
Ginny said cheerfully when her face appeared in the mirror.
"Hi, Ginny, how are you?"
Hermione asked. She frowned a little.
"We're getting by. Things have been pretty weird for the last couple days. Half the school's scared because Umbridge finally managed to expel Harry, but a lot of the 6th and 7th years are starting to talk about how he and Diggory had the right idea getting out."
"They can't do that," Harry said. "McGonagall said if too many people leave—"
"She could sack Dumbledore for mismanagement," Ginny finished. "I know, she told us too, but I don't know if we can stop it. A lot of people want to be rid of her. In fact, I heard a rumor that a 7th-year Ravenclaw jumped up in the middle of class and challenged her to a duel for his newt mark."
"He did what?"
"That's just the rumor. They said Roger Davies restrained him from cursing her and tried to pass it off as stress, and he only got detention, but no one seems to know if it's true."
"It would kind of prove people are in danger of being attacked in class, though, if a student attacked her," Harry said with a smirk. Ginny giggled.
"That's the other rumor going around, that someone said that to Umbridge's face in class, and also got detention." "Either way, it's not a good sign," Hermione said. "But can she really pin it all on Dumbledore?" Hermione asked. "I mean, I'm sure that'll be the official line, but will it stick if a lot of people leave the school? If they leave, that'll be more people who can write their stories to the press, and with more people paying attention to the Quibbler now."
Ginny shrugged.
"You probably know better than I do. Maybe they'll pass another decree to keep control or something."
They might do that, Hermione thought. But on the other hand, if too many 6th and 7th years left the school at once, there wouldn't be enough tutors to teach all of them. It might be self-regulating for people who actually needed their newts for their future careers. Of course, they might be able to sack Dumbledore with only a few people leaving. It was a very rare and unusual event, after all. It was like playing chess, except she couldn't see all the pieces.
"What about George and Fred?" she asked.
Ginny frowned again.
"Maybe you should talk to them yourself."
A couple minutes later, the twins appeared in the mirror. "Hermione, I'm telling you, we've got to get out of here," Fred said at once. "I don't care if we don't have money or any place to go. I'll take Mum over Umbridge. We don't even have the DA anymore. What is there to stay here for?" Hermione sighed heavily.
"That's not a good idea," she said. "Look, Fred, I can't tell you what to do. And honestly, I can't tell you what to do either, George. You're adults. You can make your own decisions. But it's only 2 more months. I've tried to tell you it would be better for you to stay for your newts. Better for your business and better as a fallback when you're trying to get on your feet. I'm sorry if I sound like a hypocrite. I know Harry and I left, but we had other options that it's a bit late for you to look into. And now we have to worry about what will happen at Hogwarts, too. Dumbledore could be gone soon if things go badly."
"Well, if he is, we're pulling out all the stops," George cut in. "I want to try to stick it out, Hermione. I mean that," he said. "I know how much it means to you, but if Umbridge sacks Dumbledore, well, I don't think I'll be able to stop Fred from causing chaos, and someone has to make sure he doesn't hurt anybody." "Oi, I know how to be responsible," Fred protested. "You'd go nuts on your own, and you know it." "Would not. Would too."
"Boys!"
Hermione yelled. Merlin it hurt seeing them like this. It took a lot of stress to get George and Fred arguing this much, and she felt terrible coming between them.
"You need to calm down. You're no good to anyone fighting like this."
"Sorry, Hermione," they said, in unison.
I'm just worried. Everything's so uncertain right now.
Yeah, we know, George said. I can't promise what we'll do, but I promise we'll try not to do anything stupid.
Thank you, George, she said softly. That really does mean a lot to me.
And if all went well in the next few weeks, maybe she could make things a bit more certain for them. Ginny took the mirror back.
Thanks, Hermione, she said. You can always talk some sense into them. By the way, a few of us have talked about keeping the DA going. I mean, most of us weren't caught or anything, but we need some place to meet that Umbridge doesn't know about. Do you have any ideas?
Hermione quickly ran through everything she knew about the castle, but there wasn't anything suitable. Her first thought was the house elf quarters, but, amazingly for a blood purist, Umbridge was actually smart enough to order them to inform on the students. Empty classrooms weren't secure enough. Most of the other hiding spots were too small, and only Harry could get into the Chamber of Secrets. She shook her head.
I'm sorry, Ginny, but there's no place to gather with those kind of numbers. If you need to have a secret meeting with a smaller group, you can climb the Great Tower. Remember I showed you once? Any place on the 16th floor or higher should work, but take the map with you just in case. You won't be able to hold proper meetings like before, though.
Ginny sighed.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Hermione left Harry and Ginny to talk while she returned to the drawing room and chatted up Professor Slughorn. The issue with the trace had been bugging her, and she hoped he could help. She'd had the idea to bring him some crystallized pineapple from Honeydukes that morning, so he was in a good mood. She discussed her classes with him for a bit, but she quickly got to the point.
The last time Harry and I talked to Professor Dumbledore, we were talking about Tom Riddle again, and Professor Dumbledore said something that made me think he might have found a way around the trace.
Predictably, Slughorn immediately grew guarded. Well, I wouldn't know much about that, he said. I suppose Riddle, did get up to a fair amount of trouble during his summers and his school years.
We know he did. He killed for the first time when he was 16. But I was surprised there would be a way around the trace at all. I was curious about how it worked, but I couldn't find anything. I thought you might know a little about it. I might have picked up bits and pieces over the years, he said cagily. I hope you don't think I told him anything about that, Miss Granger. Of course not, Professor, but from what I know of the trace, I'm sure he would have talked to the ancient runes teacher about it first. Or maybe he tried to figure it out for himself, but he doesn't strike me as the type to do much spell analysis.
No, you're right about that, he agreed. Riddle took arithmancy, but it never seemed to excite him. And you're also right that Professor Lawson, the ancient runes teacher, would have been the only one to know all about the trace, besides Dumbledore. They wouldn't allow any books that described it in the school library, for obvious reasons.
Yes, that would make sense, wouldn't it? It's just that I'll be honest with you, Professor. I'm worried that I might need a way around the trace.
She tried to look more scared and vulnerable than she felt.
I'm not looking to do anything bad with it.
Technically true, but that wasn't the same as not using it.
I understand why the law's in place, even if I don't fully agree with it. But I already found a way around it that I was using to do smaller spells, and I was careful not to cause any trouble with that.
Did you really? Slughorn said.
Yes, well, it's not even that big a secret. Toy wands don't actually trigger the trace.
Also true, even if it had been ages since she had used one from the store.
But the Ministry's watching me closer now, and I'm getting worried. What if they try the same thing with me that they did with Harry? Try to convict me for using magic in self-defense. It wouldn't have to be Dementors. Just arranging for me to be attacked outside Diagon Alley might be enough.
Do you really think they would do that?
I wouldn't put it past them after what I've seen, sir.
Slughorn leaned back, biting his lip. He took a sip of his wine. You know, Miss Granger, he said, but his voice was far away, as if he was reasoning with himself. Tom Riddle was probably the most brilliant student I ever had. Oh, I've had better students in particular subjects, but he was the best all around. For all the good it did anyone, he grumbled. I was so much more careful after him, always second-guessing myself. And you dazzle in arithmancy, Miss Granger. I've never seen anything like it. But I'm most of all glad that you have one thing that Tom Riddle never had.
A conscience?
She said in confusion. Well, yes, but I meant Dumbledore's trust. Riddle was my greatest blunder, but he was never Dumbledore's." He trailed off, reflecting to himself. "I don't know everything about the trace, and I intend to keep it that way, you understand?" She nodded. "I know that it's carved into the National Runestone Network. It's a runic spell that detects the presence of any witch or wizard under the age of 17, triangulates their position, and records it at the Ministry. It can't track anyone who's of age, of course, and they'd have to recarve it on every stone in the network to change that, so no one worries about that. And I suppose there must be a way to remove yourself from the list early if Riddle did it, but I don't know what it is."
"Ah, thank you for telling me that much, then," she said. "Where would I find those runestones, anyway?"
"Oh, they're all over, regularly spaced along all the major ley lines. There's a line that runs due east from Hogwarts through Hogsmeade, another one running through Diagon Alley. Several stones around the Ministry, and the anchor stones, or at least the cornerstones, of most old family manors would be part of the network, since most of them are built on ley line convergences. Though not this one, I'm afraid. I don't think it's the main family manor of the Blacks when it was built."
Hermione frowned. She'd have a hard time snooping around any of those places, with the Ministry breathing down her neck to find the runestones. "I see. Thanks for the help, Professor."
"Not a problem, Miss Granger. Not a problem at all."
According to Ron and Ginny, things were only getting worse at Hogwarts. Over the next week, 2 more 7th years dropped out, and tensions in the castle were continuing to rise. The black quills were common knowledge now. Umbridge didn't use them all the time, but because of them, several people had snapped and attacked her like Ginny had when she tried to give their friends detention. These attacks had been stopped by other teachers, and sometimes Slytherin students whom Umbridge seemed to like. The attackers, of course, received the harshest penalties available, but it never seemed to deter the next one. There were rumors that Umbridge was searching for worse punishments, but no one could agree on what they would be. The old punishments that Filch kept threatening seemed to be the top theory, but some of the younger students naively suggested the Cruciatus Curse. It probably wasn't a good sign that Hermione believed Umbridge capable of that. As much as she would have liked to see that woman driven from the castle, or at least cursed into the infirmary, she was pretty sure it would do more harm than good. The Weasleys reported that most of the teachers felt the same way, but their admonitions to the student body were increasingly falling on deaf ears. But while she was worrying about Hogwarts, the Queen's birthday came on the 21st of April, and one of Hermione's plans finally worked out for a change. "The Queen celebrated her birthday at Buckingham Palace today with a bit of mystery added in," the reader said on the Evening News. "Over the weekend, an anonymous gift arrived for Her Majesty, signed only by an Archimedes, and postmarked from a post office box in London registered under the same name. The Queen's guard opened the package and found this stunning platinum necklace containing 70 flawless blue and white diamonds, and a short note expressing the sender's birthday wishes." Hermione was pleased to see that the full text of the letter, including the return address, was visible on the screen next to the picture of the necklace. "Your Majesty, on the occasion of your 70th birthday, I wish to offer you my heartfelt congratulations, and offer my warmest wishes for your special day. Your continuing reign has been an inspiration to your subjects these many years. In your lifetime of public service, your strong leadership through times of joy and sorrow, and your personal attentiveness to your realm, has been an example to us all. Moreover, your commitment to upright governance has been a symbol of stability and faith in our leadership that I have increasingly come to appreciate on a personal level over the years. As a token of my appreciation, please accept this necklace, specially commissioned in your honor and crafted with the finest tools and techniques now available to commemorate this happy event. I have the honor to remain, Madame, your Majesty's most humble and obedient servant, Archimedes." She had considered including a one-line note with the parcel, making it as short and mysterious as possible, but she decided to go with a formal letter for 2 reasons. First, no matter how much time she spent in the magical world, she still considered herself a subject of the Queen, and her conscience would not allow her to be anything other than properly respectful. And second, with this whole endeavor, she was trying to cultivate a reputation for the highest standards of professionalism, and that demanded the formal letter as well. The letter closes with the famous quote by Archimedes in Greek, which translates to, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth," the newsreader continued.
Upon examining the necklace, jewelers were surprised to discover that the diamonds were entirely synthetic. Producing synthetic diamonds in such quality was thought to be beyond the capabilities of any gemological laboratory in the world, and experts are at a loss as to how the necklace was made. However, based on the price scale for smaller synthetic diamonds, it has been appraised at £175,000. When the report ended, Hermione felt the gazes of her parents slowly turn in her direction. "Hermione," her dad said, Did you send the Queen a flawless diamond necklace worth more than our house for her birthday?" her mum said in disbelief. Yes, I did," Hermione said with a smile. "But how?" Dad demanded. "Magic." "But what about that statute of secrecy thing?" "I didn't violate it. Even if the Ministry could trace it back to me, which they probably can't, the Muggles think it was made by a laboratory. It's not that far beyond what actual labs can do, so they'll never suspect otherwise. The laws on wizards working within the Muggle economy are pretty loose as long as they pass as Muggles. I checked. They're written that way because purebloods used to do that a lot." "But that doesn't allow doing business with actual magic, does it?" "That's the beauty of it, Dad. That necklace isn't magical. It was made with magic, but it's completely inert with no magic in it, and that's all the Ministry cares about." "But £175,000?" he said. "From scratch? Will they really let you do that? How does that not upend the entire economy?" "Well, if I gave them out like candy, it might break the world diamond market, but I can't really do that without tipping people off and breaking the statute of secrecy. And beyond that, the goblins require you to keep large quantities of money in the Muggle world to keep it from disrupting the magical economy. Plus, I had to get an alchemist license to do it, long story, which also limits what I can do." "I don't know. Still feels like cheating somehow," Dad said. "It's not cheating," she protested. "It's not like I fixed the lottery or something. I'm no more cheating than Bill Gates was being the first person to figure out how to make billions selling computers. Well, not the first, but you know what I mean." "But aren't you exploiting us Muggles by doing that, Hermione?" Mum said sternly. "Charging thousands of pounds for things that cost you next to nothing to make?" "How so? I'm undercutting the competition by 50%. Competition that consists mainly of the De Beers cartel, which is notorious for being anti-competitive and artificially inflating prices. I can only deal in small volumes, so it'll do next to nothing to hurt the actual laboratories. And with Muggle technology to make synthetic diamonds is constantly improving, I'm only speeding up a change that was going to happen anyway. And that's leaving aside the fact that I still had to buy the platinum." Mum sighed and rubbed her temples. "Hermione, why are you doing this?" she said. "This isn't you. You've always cared about knowledge, not money. And we don't need that kind of money, not by a long shot." "It's different in the magical world, Mum," she said. "Money buys power there, and right now that power is actively threatening my life just because I wasn't born in their world. I won't lie to you, part of this is just to see if I could do it, and part of it is because I want to give my boyfriend financial security when he graduates. But the more I think about it, it's the money that's making the Ministry bury its head in the sand while Voldemort gains power as much as it is Fudge's stubbornness. I've felt so powerless all year, and I want to do something about that." Mum got up and hugged her. "I wish you didn't have to do this, Hermione," she said. "I know, Mum, but we're way past that," she said. "Please trust me. I can make this work." "We do trust you. It doesn't stop us worrying. But if you need to do this to stay safe, or safer, then do it." "Thanks, Mum," she said with a smile. Dumbledore sacked. On the run for undermining Ministry. Umbridge named headmistress of Hogwarts. In a shocking turn of events, Hogwarts headmaster Albus Dumbledore was fired from his post last night and went on the run after a warrant was issued for his arrest for attempting to subvert the Ministry of Magic. Inside sources report that the Ministry has gathered evidence that the recent string of dropouts from Hogwarts and attacks on staff was in fact part of a scheme by Dumbledore to manipulate the students of Hogwarts into bringing down the Ministry and Minister Fudge. The Ministry took action Thursday night after a group of 5th, 6th, and 7th year students staged a vicious attack on High Inquisitor Dolores Umbridge. The High Inquisitor was saved from the ambush only by the actions of an anonymous 5th year student who discovered the plot and warned her in time. The High Inquisitor called the R's to take the would-be attackers into custody. All 5 conspirators were summarily expelled, at which time the plot by Dumbledore was discovered. Unfortunately, when confronted by Minister Fudge, High Inquisitor Umbridge, and 2 R's, Dumbledore fled the school with the help of his pet phoenix. He is now a fugitive from justice, and anyone with knowledge of his whereabouts is encouraged to inform the Ministry at once. Under the authority granted by Educational Decree No. 32, High Inquisitor Umbridge was promoted to the position of headmistress to restore order to the school. Hermione hurried to Grimmauld Place once again, and was relieved to find that while the conspiracy was real, the only one of the 5 conspirators she knew was Lee Jordan. Fred and George had apparently stayed out of it, but she really hoped they didn't do anything stupid now, especially with their best friend gone. She was relieved to learn from Kingsley Shacklebolt that the would-be attackers would all get off with a legal slap on the wrist, mostly because everyone at the Ministry was preoccupied with Dumbledore's disappearance. The headmaster's involvement, of course, was entirely fabricated, but that didn't make her feel any better. So that's what Umbridge would do when things got too hot for her. The good news was that the new Quibbler interview was to be published the Monday after Dumbledore was sacked. Unfortunately, the timing couldn't have been worse. Hermione had hoped the news of children being tortured at Hogwarts with Umbridge's black quills would be enough to get their parents riled up, even with the media hype focused on Dumbledore. Little did she know that new developments that same day were about to make the Quibbler's article hopelessly out of date. She was mildly surprised when her D.A. Gallon heated up around her neck. She still wore her master coin on a necklace, but the Gallons had hardly received any use since Harry gave his master to Ron. She glanced at it to see what he was up to, but she was much more surprised when she saw that the message wasn't from Ron at all, but was a message to the master copies from one of the other Gallons, and her heart skipped a beat when she read it. "George in trouble. Please help. F.G.W." Hermione didn't know what was happening, but if it was bad enough that Fred was begging her to come up to the castle in broad daylight, she had no time to waste. She raced to the castle, for the first time willing the night bus to go faster as it bounced around the country. While she sat, she mentally went over all the new hexes and curses she'd created. The ossifying curse, the blistering curse, the nightmare tooth-removing hex. Some she hadn't yet finished, or was even afraid to try them, but if George was badly hurt, she thought she might just snap, especially if Umbridge was involved. As soon as the bus made a stop in Hogsmeade, she practically ran to Honeyduke's. Slapping a sickle on the surprised Mr. Flume's counter, she dashed to the cellar, hopped on the broom, and flew through the secret passages at a decidedly unsafe speed. Fred was waiting for her where the secret passage came out. "Oh, Hermione, thank Merlin!" he exclaimed. "Fred, what's wrong?" she said breathlessly. "Where's George?" "The Great Hall. Come on, you have to talk some sense into him." He started running down the corridor, and she hurried to catch up. "I have to talk sense into George?" she said. "Just hurry. Watch out for the swamp." "What?" They passed a miniature swamp in the middle of one of the corridors. She was starting to notice that the whole castle looked askew, burn marks all over the place, suits of armor knocked over, and paintings hanging every which way. "I'll tell you later. We have to get to the Great Hall. They might have already started," he said frantically. This was bad. He must have thought George was in real danger, the way he was carrying on. "Fred, started what?" she said. "It's been a mess since Dumbledore left," he said hurriedly. "Umbridge started this thing called the Inquisitorial Squad. She put a bunch of Slytherins on it and gave them the power to dock points and stuff. The House Cup's a joke now, and they're ratting us out on everything, so we went on this big pranking spree to fight back. Not attacking her directly, so she couldn't expel us. Just fireworks, class disruptions, free-skiving snack boxes and such." "And?" "She caught us." "Detentions?" she said worriedly. "Worse. She got another educational decree, and—" He grimaced like he was about to be sick. "I told George we had to leave. I told her I was dropping out, but George still wants to stay. You'll have to tell him to leave. Just see for yourself." They reached the entrance hall and pushed the door open. Hermione's eyes bulged out, and she felt like she might be sick herself. There was a whipping post set up in the middle of the great hall. George was tied to it, his shirt gone, with several lines of crimson red across his back, as Filch brought a horsewhip down hard on him while the student body watched. "No!" She sprinted forward as all eyes in the hall turned to her. Umbridge's normally toad-like face gaped like a fish. She caught a glimpse of the Gryffindor chasers holding Ron and Ginny back from interfering, while a number of Slytherins with new purple badges had their wands out to keep others in line. Only Filch was oblivious as he struck again and again with obvious fury until Hermione jumped in front of George and the tip of the whip glanced off her cheek.
"Ah, Expelliarmus!"
she cried, and the whip went flying into the crowd. She touched her cheek, and her fingers came away red. With the threat of Filch removed, she leveled her wand at Umbridge next.
"Get away from him, you bitch!"
A heavy silence fell over the hall, but it was quickly broken by Umbridge shouting,
"Hermione Granger, you are not welcome here! You are trespassing and in violation of educational decree, which my tutor has exclusive first option to discipline me for,"
she said quickly, thanking God she'd read over the fine print.
"And I was never given written notice that my open invitation was revoked. If you want me to leave, I'll leave, but I'm taking George with me." "You most certainly will not! Mr. Weasley must be properly punished for his numerous offenses against this school."
Hermione ignored her and spun around to look George over. He had dropped to his knees, half hanging by his wrists from the post.
"Diffindo,"
she incanted, and his hands dropped, leaving him leaning against the column. Hermione, what are you doing here?" he said weakly.
"Fred called me. Drop out."
"What?"
"Drop out! Tell them you're dropping out of school, and they'll have to end this."
He stared up at her with wide eyes. "I wanted to stay for you," he said.
"Damn it, George, I didn't mean this. Graduating isn't worth this. I'm not going to let you take it for me. Tell them—"
"Hey, get out of the way!" Filch wheezed behind her. "I've been wanting this for 24 years!" Hermione spun around in fury and pointed her wand at him, a brain freeze hex on the tip of her tongue. But as he flinched, she forced the urge down. She couldn't do that in front of Umbridge, not to mention so many other witnesses. That would get her arrested.
"Don't you start, Filch!" she spat. "I don't know what's happened to you. We used to be on fairly good terms. I helped you learn potions, remember? If you feel like you owe me anything for that, let us leave in peace."
Seeing him back off hesitantly at that, she turned back around and whispered in her boyfriend's ear.
"George," she whispered, "I've got the money."
He turned and looked into her eyes in confusion.
"Or I will soon. I was going to surprise you at graduation. I found a way to make some fast. I'll be able to pay you everything Bagman built you out of, and then some. It's for the store. I want to be a partner."
George's eyes widened to the size of saucers.
A partner? You mean it?" he whispered. "Yes."
"Hermione, I think I love you."
"Tell them,"
she insisted, refusing to be distracted. He staggered to his feet and stared bitterly at Umbridge. "I'm dropping out of school," he said. "Oh, thank Merlin!" Fred cried. "Oi, Peeves!" The resident poltergeist swooped down and stared him in the face.
"Yes, your Weasleyness?" he said.
"Get our brooms out of Umbridge's office, and you can have the extra loot we hid in Myrtle's bathroom."
"What?"
Umbridge shrieked, but it was too late. Half a minute later there was a loud crash, and Peeves zoomed back with the twins' 2 clean sweep 5s.
"Accio George's cloak,"
Hermione cast, and the garment flew into her hands.
"Sorry about this, but you need something for the bleeding."
She threw the cloak over his back and pinned it around his chest. He hissed in pain, but he pulled her onto the broom with him, her in front, and the Weasley twins flew off into the sunset, leaving a Peeves-induced fireworks frenzy behind them. "So, where are we going?" Fred asked, once they were clear. "St. Mungo's?"
"Do you trust them?"
Hermione said. "They did fine with Dad."
"Your dad didn't do a runner whilst defacing school property, and Umbridge might still be able to nail me for trespassing. Sorry, but I'm feeling really paranoid right now."
"I'm guessing you don't have a shop front yet," George said, and she shook her head. "What?" said Fred. "Oh, right. Hermione wants to be our partner for the joke shop." Fred stared at her. "Are you kidding?"
"I wouldn't prank you about this, Fred. I want in. And give me a few weeks and we won't have to worry about money anymore."
Fred gaped at her. All he could think of to say was, "Good. That's one less thing."
"Anyway, back to the matter at hand. There's only one place I'd feel completely safe going right now,"
she said. Well, her house too, but her parents weren't equipped to treat whip lacerations.
"Headquarters."
"Headquarters?" Fred said incredulously. "Like Grimmauld Place headquarters? Are you balmy? That's where Mum is."
Fred, George just got publicly whipped. Your mum will understand, and if she doesn't, I'll make her understand."
"I think we should do it, Freddie," George agreed. "I'm not feeling so hot, honestly." Fred paled again. "All right, then," he said meekly. "We'd better land. You okay to apparate?" Yeah, if you can give me a hand, I think we can get the three of us there. Don't tell anybody."
"We can take the night bus," Hermione started.
"We're good," George said. "Just hold on tight." They landed on the outskirts of Hogsmeade, well outside the anti-apparition wards of the castle. Once they were back on their feet, Hermione took Fred's arm, and they apparated to the safe point near Grimmauld Place. Hermione hadn't apparated side along with a human before, and Fred and George weren't really trained for it, so it was rougher than it was with Dobby. She checked herself over to make sure she wasn't missing any parts when they appeared in London. Fortunately, she was okay. Unfortunately, George staggered in pain and nearly collapsed. Hermione and Fred quickly supported him on their shoulders and pulled him up the street to the door of headquarters. Hermione rang the bell and heard the shouting from Mrs. Black's portrait inside. A minute later, Mrs. Weasley opened the door.
"How many times do I have to tell you?" she started before she noticed who she was talking to. "Fred, George, what are you doing? My God, George, what happened?" "Filch whipped him, Miss Weasley," Hermione said. "What? He didn't!" "He did. He needs help, Mrs. Weasley, and I'm a little paranoid about St. Mungo's right now."
Mrs. Weasley was at a loss for a moment, but seeing the grave looks on their faces, she pulled herself together and said,
"Bring him down to the kitchen. Horace, Remus, Sirius! Get down here!"
They hurried George into the kitchen and laid him on his stomach on the table. Hermione gently pulled his cloak off of him. Mrs. Weasley cried out and nearly fainted at the sight. At that moment, Sirius and Remus ran into the kitchen, followed by a curious Harry and Professor Slughorn. "Molly, what's wrong? Oh, bollocks! What happened?" Sirius said.
"Filch happened,"
Hermione said. "Filch? How?" Remus asked. "This looks like he was whipped."
"He was."
"Educational Decree number 32, Fred growled. "By order of the Ministry, blah blah blah, corporal punishment, blah blah blah, whipping for severe infractions." "Oh, that's what that was?" Remus said. "I saw the headline in the paper this morning, but I hadn't got around to reading it. I didn't know it was that bad, with the story about the quills breaking."
"Didn't stop them. I saw the whole thing," Hermione said tearfully.
"Hermione, you're hurt," Harry said, suddenly noticing her face.
"It's just a flesh wound,"
she said, forcing a smile. She wet a paper towel in the sink and wiped down her cheek. "Let me give you a hand with that, Molly," Slughorn said as they tended George's wounds. "I think there's a pain potion and a disinfectant wash in this cabinet."
"They set up a whipping post in the Great Hall," Hermione continued. "No one could interfere because Umbridge recruited a bunch of Slytherins to be her personal brown shirts and keep everyone else in line. George was being a stubborn ass, wanting to stay till graduation because I'd asked him, but I begged him to give it up and leave. It wasn't worth it." "Of course it wasn't worth it," Mrs. Weasley spat. "It shouldn't have ever been legal."
"Why not, Mum?" Fred asked bitterly. "Didn't you say Dad has marks from when you were in school?"
"Not like this, Fred. Apollyon Pringle used a cane on your father when he caught us in the astronomy tower at 4 in the morning. Once. But he never used a whip. And even then Dumbledore fired him after that year for drawing blood too many times. Oh, my poor boy."
"Well, we're done with school, Mum," Fred said firmly. "We're not going back to that."
"Of course you're not, dear. Maybe the Ministry will come to its senses and you can do it next year."
"We're going to start our shop," he told her. Mrs. Weasley sighed heavily.
"I'm not going to argue with you, boys. Not today. I know that's been your dream since you were old enough to understand what a joke shop was. I'm just saying you need to be realistic. A shop is an uncertain endeavor, and it takes a lot of money to start."
He glanced at Hermione. "We've got it worked out, Mum," he said. "And yes, it's legal. Trust us."
I do trust you two," Mrs. Weasley said softly. "I still think you're mad, but I trust you. Sometimes I think this is the one thing you've ever been serious about."
Hermione smiled to see some reconciliation among the Weasleys. Now, if only they could get Percy to pull his head out of his proverbial arse. Mrs. Weasley, Seamus, and Professor Slughorn finished bandaging George's wounds and helped him up to his bedroom, where they again laid him down on his stomach on the bed. One by one, everyone left the room. Mrs. Weasley muttered something about sending Fudge a howler, until only Fred and Hermione remained. Fred quickly made a break for it too, at a glare from George. Hermione sat on the end of the bed, stroking George's hair.
"I'm sorry, George," she said. "I told you I wanted you to stay at Hogwarts, but I never thought it would be that bad."
"No, I was being an idiot," he responded. "I cared so much about not disappointing you."
"I'm not disappointed, really. I might have been if you'd done it earlier, but that's how I was raised. You finish what you start, and you especially stay in school. But I was being a hypocrite. I knew how much of a farce the system is now."
George propped himself up on his arm.
"You weren't being a hypocrite, Hermione," he insisted. "You're still getting tutoring. You're still going to take your owls if Umbridge doesn't screw that up, too. You were just looking out for me, and Fred. We both appreciate that." Hermione leaned down and kissed him softly. "About what you said before," he continued. "You really want to be a partner? And you've got the money?" "Yes, and not yet, but I will soon. I know how much it means to you."
"How?"
"Magic. Long story, but it's legal."
"Well, good, 'cause we just used up most of our stock." Hermione sighed.
"Boys."
"You don't have to help us, you know."
"No, but I want to. For you. And Fred. Besides, it's not like this is the first business I'm invested in. I'll be getting something out of it, too."
"Yeah?"
"George, about what you said before?" she asked.
"Oh, Merlin," he groaned. "Look, Hermione, that just kind of slipped out." She put a finger to his lips.
"You don't have to apologize to me. And I wish I had an answer for you. I know that's not what you want to hear. It's just all too much right now. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, and I'm definitely not bailing on the shop. You can count on me for that."
He nodded with a hint of relief, and she leaned down to kiss him again.
"I need to go. Mum and Dad will be worried about me. But I'll be back on Thursday."
"Thanks, Hermione." Hermione was subdued on the bus ride home. She gave her parents a brief explanation of what had happened, which appalled them just as much as it had Mrs. Weasley, but she wasn't in a mood to talk beyond that. She managed to convey enough hints to Mum that she needed to talk with her one-on-one, which she did after supper.
"All right, Hermione,"
she said, coming into her bedroom.
"What else happened that you couldn't say in front of your father?" "George said he loved me."
Mum sat down.
"Oh." "Granted, he was bleeding and possibly delirious, and I'd just told him I wanted to be a partner in his shop when he said it. He even tried to take it back, but still." "That's big." "Yeah. What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't have an answer because there was too much going on, and I needed to think about it. But I did tell him I wasn't going anywhere. Was that okay, Mum?" "Hermione, there's no easy way to handle that at your age. But I think that was probably about the best you could have done. Especially if you really do want to stay with him. How old is George again?" "Just turned 18. "I see. And how do you feel about him?" "I like him a lot, Mum," she said. "People always underestimate him. And Fred, honestly, but George more so. He's the smarter twin and the more sensible one, most of the time. He stops to think and pay attention to how other people are feeling more often. He supports me, which isn't that special by itself, but he gets me. I mean, I'm not saying this well. I mean, no matter what crazy project I get up to, George and Fred can take it in stride even when they don't understand it. I know plenty of boys, but they're the only ones who can really keep up with me."
"So you fancy him?" Mum observed shrewdly. She rolled her eyes.
"Yes, Mum, I'm dating him, aren't I? But he's fancied me longer, I think. And we've known each other since I was 11, so it's not like this is new, although it did take me by surprise." "Okay, I get it." Mum held up a hand. "I'm not asking you to justify your relationship to me. I'm just asking how you feel about him." I don't know, Mum," Hermione admitted. "I really like him. I've been so grateful to have him. Honestly, there are times when I feel like I need him around just to keep me sane these days. But I don't know if I'm there yet. I could see myself staying with him, long term." She stopped and thought for a minute. "Probably more than any other boy I know. But I'm scared. After the past 5 years I've had, who knows what's going to happen next week? What do you think I should do?" Mum looked at her and considered her problem for a minute before speaking. "What I think you shouldn't do," she said, "is that you shouldn't let uncertainty about the future hold you back. Bad things are going to happen, and you might get your heart broken, but that's the risk you have to take. You're clearly smart enough to step back and take stock of things before you charge into a relationship, and believe me, your father and I are thankful for that. But you also have to be willing to take a chance now and then, within reason, of course. And you definitely shouldn't string George along, even if you don't mean to. It sounds like he's fallen for you, and this is the time when you need to let him off easy if you're not serious about it." "But I am, though," Hermione said. Mum nodded. "You sound like you are, so my advice would be to let it sit a while longer. If he wants to take it back, you should give him the space to get more comfortable with things. Now, don't let things become awkward between you, and don't be afraid to have a frank conversation with him when you think the time is right. If things do get awkward, or if he starts to press the issue, you'll want to do that sooner rather than later. But otherwise, you sound like you have a healthy relationship going, so just try to let it develop naturally the same as before." I think I can do that, Mum," Hermione said. "Thank you." "Any time, Hermione." She got up and hugged her. "You're growing up so fast. Just be careful, and I mean with everything. And use protection."
Mom!